2.4 billion metric tons. That's how much wheat, rice, and maize humans consume each year, but climate change could pose a significant threat to our harvests of these staple crops, which billions of people all around the world depend on for their survival. For example, according to this NASA study published in 2021, maize harvests are projected to drop by nearly 24% or 260 million tons by 2070. Maize, of course, includes corn, which is used to manufacture over 50% of livestock and poultry feed. So yeah, even if you're a self-avowed carnivore, you should absolutely be shitting yourself right now. And yes, that is despite the obvious lack of fiber in your diet. Perhaps it's no surprise that scientists are busy exploring ways of enhancing the heat tolerance of various crops to protect crop yields as the earth warms further. Once again, scientists come to the rescue, while politicians continue to twiddle their thumbs and make the world an infinitely worse place for everyone. Which reminds me, if you'd like to learn about the great stuff that scientists get up to, you should like this video and subscribe to NeuroEverything. Now, back to the video. While it's true that small increases in carbon dioxide and temperature can initially boost photosynthesis rates in some plants, things start to get a little more complicated when temperatures spike past the 40 degrees centigrade mark, as they've had a habit of doing recently. The problem with that is obviously that photosynthesis, that marvelous thing that all life on Earth depends on, is itself, just like most other biological reactions, controlled by enzymes. And one of these enzymes is Rubisco. Rubisco might sound familiar, especially if you've studied biology at school. In fact, because of the important role it plays in binding carbon dioxide gas to turn it into organic carbon molecules that you can stuff your face with, later down the line, Rubisco is the most abundant protein on Earth. It captures nearly 100 gigatons of carbon from the atmosphere each year, turning it from carbon dioxide to glucose. Rubisco just happens to be one of the most ancient proteins out there as well. It's about 2.5 billion years old, which is old, especially when you compare it to a protein like hemoglobin, which is only 400 million years old or so. So yes, Rubisco is ancient. We all learned in school that plants carry out photosynthesis, a process where plants use sunlight to turn carbon dioxide into glucose, releasing oxygen as a byproduct into the atmosphere. But the thing is, plants did not always produce oxygen. If we go back a couple of billion years ago, we'll find that the earliest forms of photosynthesis were actually anaerobic, meaning that they did not produce or even tolerate oxygen. And that's because that's the kind of environment that the Earth was like back then, before the great oxygenation event. And that's the kind of environment that Rubisco arrived into and evolved in. The reason why that's such a huge fucking problem is because it means that Rubisco appeared at a time when it did not need to tell the difference between carbon dioxide and oxygen, because there wasn't any oxygen around. Today, of course, oxygen does exist in the atmosphere, and so Rubisco does this weird thing that proves what an ill-equipped and slightly shite protein it is. Instead of exclusively binding to and fixing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere into organic compounds, Rubisco can sometimes fuck up and also bind to and react with oxygen. This is called photorespiration, and the problem with photorespiration is that it increases whenever temperatures rise, because Rubisco struggles more and more to discriminate between carbon dioxide and oxygen, which leads it to bind to oxygen instead, especially at higher temperatures. This reduces the efficiency of photosynthesis because it undoes, not quite sure which one it is, but it undoes some of the valuable work the plant has already done to turn carbon dioxide into glucose and oxygen. Instead, at higher temperatures, Rubisco's insatiable appetite for oxygen, as well as it being just fucking awful at doing literally its one single job, means that under these conditions, plants can begin producing carbon dioxide and consuming oxygen. That's why you don't actually need to reach the high temperatures of 45 degrees centigrade, where enzymes permanently deform and denature, losing their function, for crop yields to begin to suffer. Fossil evidence shows that this has happened before, specifically in the late Miocene, around 8 to 4 million years ago, where the Earth was exceptionally warm with sea surface temperatures at high latitudes being roughly 10 degrees centigrade higher than they are today. Forests and woodlands turned into savannas all across the world, and this would eventually lead to the extinction of several animal and plant species, including several hominid species in Europe and Asia, like Dryopithecus and Anchoropithecus and Gracopithecus. Fortunately, however, unlike in the late Miocene, we've got some great scientists today working on this. Science is about solving problems using critical thinking skills, which is why I'm glad to be telling you today about Brilliant, the perfect app for people who, like me, enjoy learning by doing and therefore engaging their critical thinking skills. Instead of getting you to memorize fast like they get you to do at school, Brilliant gives you the chance to apply that knowledge through problem-solving exercises which they structure into their courses. It's a great way to learn, perhaps the only way to learn, now that we've entered into the age of artificial intelligence, where there is less of an emphasis on what you know and more of an emphasis on problem-solving skills. In previous videos, I've already told you about having taken Brilliant's course on search engines and logical reasoning. But Brilliant releases new courses regularly. They've just recently released a course on digital circuits, programming with functions, and logic. So you'll never run out of great educational content to challenge yourself with. To try everything that Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/NeuroEverything or scan the QR code on the screen. There's also a link in the description. You'll get 20% off the annual premium subscription with that link. Thank you to Brilliant for sponsoring this video. Now, back to Rubisco. Earlier this year, a team of scientists from UC Berkeley published a paper where they mapped out more than 99% of Rubisco's single amino acid variants, a number that came out to be around 9,000 variants in total. That team was able to show that some of these single amino acid variants, or mutant Rubisco enzymes, could bind carbon dioxide much more specifically than it did oxygen, limiting photorespiration. One Rubisco mutant, for example, had double the affinity for carbon dioxide, while another mutant had 3 times the affinity for carbon dioxide. In other words, should we genetically engineer our crops today to exclusively carry Rubisco variants that are much more specific to carbon dioxide, we could increase crop yield substantially and protect our crop harvests against rising global temperatures. The only issue with that, though, is kcat, which represents the number of carbon dioxide molecules that Rubisco is able to bind to and fix into organic carbon molecules per unit time. So basically, let me explain to you what the problem is. You cannot increase the specificity of Rubisco for carbon dioxide, making sure it binds and reacts to less and less oxygen, making it more efficient. But efficiency isn't the same as power. Raw power, because as it turns out, the more specific you make an enzyme like Rubisco to its substrate, carbon dioxide in this case, the slower the reaction proceeds overall, meaning less photosynthesis. So scientists like Dr. Noam Pryorez, the lead author in the UC Berkeley paper we talked about earlier, need to find a balance. They need to find a way to increase Rubisco specificity for carbon dioxide while also limiting the kcat costs involved. Perhaps limiting our emissions might be the easier option after all. That said, there's still some hope, as in 2024, scientists from MIT managed to increase the specificity of Rubisco for carbon dioxide by roughly 30% without any significant reduction in kcat. They achieved these findings in tobacco plants, which is something that's puzzled me for the last week or so, but I suppose they just did. Perhaps the researchers from UC Berkeley can extend some of these findings to other slightly more useful crops. Fortunately for the UC Berkeley researchers, their grants from the National Institute of Health only account for $93,852 of their total funding, and so unlike other research teams all across the United States, they'll likely be able to continue their wonderful work unaffected by Trump's tyrannical cuts to science funding, supported instead by an extremely generous $11 million grant given to them by the Zuckerberg Institute, and yes, that Zuckerberg and his wife. Priscilla Chan. The $11 million grant was provided to UC Berkeley in 2022 to support research aimed at enhancing the natural ability of plants and soil microbes to capture and store carbon to meet the scale of the climate change problem. I feel that at a minimum, that is one tiny piece of good news in all the shit that we've been going through recently. Scientific research austerity is not something that humanity can afford. You not just simply fuck up the planet and every living creature that resides on it in every conceivable way, only to then decide you will cut funding to the research that might just, if you're so exceptionally fortunate, save your fucking unworthy ass. My name is Hashem, and I'm a medical doctor. I graduated from the University of Cambridge, and I like science. I also like being angry, which makes me the perfect person to watch right now if, like me, you like science and you have a shit ton of resentment that you don't know what to do with. Subscribe and press the bell icon to be notified when I post my next video.